be doing a little bit of a demo / rundown and overview of just project management in GitHub. So during this, I'll be showing a creation of a GitHub repository, setting up the project board and issues within that, using an issue and a commit template, and then overall just highlighting why these things combined are so useful. So I won't be going over any specific coding stuff or like best practices of Git commands, branching, merging. That stuff is not going to be covered in this. So to begin with, I'm going to give a little bit of background, I guess, to GitHub in case you aren't as familiar with the tool. So GitHub is essentially a version control software. It's meant for mainly programmers, but others too, to be able to store files. So specifically code files in this case. A lot of even open source software run their projects entirely off of GitHub, being able not only to keep their code there, but collaborate with their team members, external contributors, get feedback from the community, and that kind of thing. So GitHub is really centered around collaboration. That being said, there are a lot of different elements to some GitHub repositories. So to show an example of that, I have this template I had created. And in this is a single contribution from myself. I really don't plan to do much development on this at all, or like have a team around it or anything like that. But if I did, we could leverage not only the code section to store and share our code files or notes or whatnot, but we could also use the issues section to assign out tasks. We could use the project section to organize those issues into maybe milestones or different sprints. We could use the wiki tab to keep track of documentation or questions or troubleshooting tips about the development. The pull requests and action sections are more for projects that have been really fully fleshed out. So pull request, if you have contributors developing components of your open source software, then you might have pull requests to merge their changes into your code base. Same kind of thing. Actions is more for like deployment and testing of a full-blown app. So those aren't going to be as useful for our conversation today. We'll mainly be focusing on issues, projects, a little bit on wiki, not quite though. And then security insights are just tools. So that being said, I'm going to be kind of setting up a project template, and I'll be doing all of my Git commands through the command line. You can do the majority of this through the GitHub desktop client, except the commit template. That capability is not yet added to GitHub desktop. I don't know if they have plans to, but it is not currently, so that you would require the Git command line tool for. So first off, I'm going to go in here and create a brand new repository. I'll just call this our project management repository. I don't care who sees it, so it can be public. I don't need a template. I'm not caring about any of this stuff for the purposes of this. So I'm just going to create a blank repository. And then if you've used GitHub before, you know that you want to find a folder on your machine and clone your project to it. So you just do git clone and then add that URL and it will clone it. I have cloned an empty repository, which is exactly what I want. But if I list out, see my project management is right beside there. And if I go into it, it is in fact empty. So let's add a file. Let's add our first file.txt. And I'm just adding a text file. You could add data files, you could add code files that already exist, whatever. So for purposes of this, we're just going to be dealing with very simple text files. So I'm just going to use Vim to create this little text file, and then you'll want to add it to your project. And you'll want to commit it. We're just going to use our little message flag there to create a pretty basic commit. And then we want to push our commit to the repository. So once it finishes, we can refresh over here and it shows that I added that first file.txt and that contains my hello contents. All right, so now that this is all set up, we're going to do a git commit message template. And the reason for doing this might be that you have a team collaborating and you have a lot of changes being made or maybe a lot of aspects of the project. And in order to keep communication between developers to a minimum and confusion to a minimum, you want to make your commit messages as detailed as possible in order to answer as many questions through your GitHub project management approach. So the tricky part about making commits so detailed is that it's hard to remember all the aspects that you maybe changed, or it's hard for everyone to make sure that they're writing down the same thing every time. At the same time, if you're reading someone else's commit message, then you're going to have to really read through. You can't just jump maybe to a section or something and reference, okay, I got what they changed on the data part of this or whatever. So for that reason, Git commit messages templates are very useful. So in order to construct this, we want to create a .git message file. And in this file, we're going to add just some basic maybe sections. So say you would have like a summary and you'd type whatever the title of the commit would be there. And then maybe you want to indicate any related issues. Maybe you want to indicate any related commits. So for this, maybe you, for your related issues, there was a task to fix a bug, and you are committing your change that fixes the bug, so you want to, reference that issue. At the same time, you want to reference the commit that actually introduced that bug into the code base in the first place. So that would be a pretty realistic usage of these two things, and there are lots of different usages, but that is definitely one. So maybe say you also want to say changes in data, and maybe changes in interface, and we'll call it good for now. But this obviously is up to the handler and creator of the repository. All right, so at this point, we also want to make sure that Git knows that this is our template. So at this point, we do a config command. So this is assigning our global commit template to be the Git message file we just created. At this point, we want to git add it, and then we want to commit, but instead of using our M flag, our message flag, like we did last time, we're just going to leave it open. Doing this tells Git that there is a commit message template to use, and as we can see when we enter that, it does come up with this. So maybe our summary is first commit to this repo, and we don't have any issues created yet, and we don't have any commits created yet or done yet. We do the first file added, but we'll get back to that later. And then I'm just not going to add anything in here. So we have our, addition of this. And then you've committed that, so you also want to push it. And once we have that loaded over there, we can go back to here and refresh. And you'll see it added that .git message file in that home directory of the repository. And it registered our first commit. So when we click on that commit, we don't see the # summary, that comment that's hidden, but we do see the title of it and we do see the rest of the template down there. All right, so we added the commit template. One thing I do want to note is when you're working with a team, one person can add that Git message and everyone else can edit it as well. Oop, don't know what I did there. But if you have, say I committed this, but my team member pulls the changes, they'll need to also run that git config command in order for that Git message template to register for them as well. So that's just something to note. You will have to have your team members adopt the changes on their machine. All right, so the next component of this that's really fun is the issue section. So issues are a way to keep track of tasks, whether they be bug fixes, new features, documentation additions, discussions you need to have with your team. It can range from a variety of things. So we are going to go ahead and create a test issue. So let's assume, maybe we're working on a big ol' application and you're needing to add your data and some logic and your application framework and your interface, all of that stuff. So let's start with like the basic building blocks of that. So add data. We're just going to call it very simple. All right, and at this point, maybe gather it from assorted sources, and you could add links, you can create little subtasks in here, all sorts of things. The other part of this you would want to do is just address everything over here. So assignees, maybe I'm assigning it to myself, maybe I'm assigning it to a team member or multiple. I'd want to add a label. So for this case, actually, I don't really like any of the ones that are in here because maybe my project management approach is I want to use the labels to indicate different aspects of the projects. Like maybe you have different modules, or maybe you have data and interface and logic, or maybe you use different programming languages in the same project. So you want to tag where you use different languages. That can be good for like people who are more experienced with different languages, sorting through and finding tasks appropriate to their skill set. So I'm not really happy with any of these, so I can actually edit the labels. And I'm going to create a new label called data, and anything to do with data, importing, cleaning, etc. And I want to create my data label. So if I go back to issues, I don't know if it'll have saved my note there. Yeah, it did. Great. So I want to reassign myself though, and then I want to give that data label to it. Awesome. And then we don't have any projects created yet, so I'll come back to that in a second. And we also don't have any milestones created. I'm not going to cover milestones in this, but milestones would be if you had a specific sprint due on a specific date, or if you had specific aspects of the project that you wanted to categorize the tasks under, you can definitely set up milestones. All right, so submitting that new issue, we have our add data issue number 1, my comment here, my label added, self-assigned, all of that great stuff. So going back to issues, you can also edit your labels right here under that issues banner. And then same with milestones, you can create a milestone, title, due date, description, and then as you saw, assign issues to milestones. So as you saw, we have the option to add issues to projects. So we're going to cover that project section next. Again, we're going to skip over these because these aren't really for our project management overview purposes. But out of the projects, let's create a project. And I personally like to use a triage board. So it'll have a needs assigned, high priority, low priority, closed. You can add an in progress column, stuff like that. But you could set it up for categories, for instance, if you wanted to organize your project board by what tasks had to do with data or interface or whatnot, or assigned to specific people maybe. However you want to set it up, it's a basic Kanban board structure. So however you want to organize tasks, GitHub is very versatile in that way. So we're just going to call it task board. I don't need a description. But the template that I like to use is the bug triage, which you'll see how it sets it up automatically in a second. So I'll just open this up a little bit. So as you can see, the template has a needs triage, high priority, low priority, closed. Sometimes adding like an in progress column is nice because you can see what people are working on at the moment. But for the purposes of this, we'll just leave it the same. So over here, you can see that the add data card that I had just created is waiting to be assigned. So I would maybe say that's high priority because in order to do anything for this project, we need our data in there first. So that's assigned to the high priority column. So do what you will with that. Awesome. So one thing I did forget to mention is being able to create an issue or a issue template. Yes. So in order to do that, you would go in your settings, and again, like the benefit for an issue template may be that you want your team just to use a consistent form, so documentation and tracking changes is easier. Maybe it's to make sure that with each task that gets created, all things are considered, however you want to do that. So to create an issue template, you scroll down to this feature section and set up a template. For purposes of this, let's say we want a feature request, preview and edit it. I'm not going to worry about this content too much, so I'm fine with that. propose my changes, commit the changes. This just adds it to the issue templates of the project management repository. So now if I want to go back to my issues and create a new issue, I can now do so from that feature request template. So new feature request. We won't be too specific in this, and I won't edit any of that. Assignee, maybe it goes to another person on my team. Labels, it's an enhancement, it's a new feature request, and maybe it has to do with the interface or something if you've added a label on for interface. Now that we've created the project though, we can actually assign it to a project, which is great. So milestones again, none. So let's say we're good to go on that issue. Now we have a second new feature request issue. Now if we go into projects and go to our task board here, we see that that new feature request issue we just created is under the needs triage, and maybe that's low priority for right now. Awesome. So at the end of this, I think it's good to bring it together because it shows the power of having your project board, your issues, your commit template, everything set up. So if we go back over here, first of all, we want to pull our changes because we did add that issue template. So we don't want any merge conflicts there. And let's say we want to edit that first file, just as an example. All right, so we're just gonna add a little bit more text in there. So now we have another change. So after we add it, we're gonna git commit it and use our template. So the title of this might be edited first file.text. So as I mentioned earlier, you can mention issues and related commits, and the benefit of that in something like this is that they actually show up and link to each other in your GitHub project. So if you go to issues, let's say we want to reference the first one for whatever reason. That would be how you mention or tag an issue. You just do the number and then the number of the issue. And then under related commits, we first have to go to our actual list of commits. But say we want to, we edited the first file, so maybe we want to reference this because it was the first file we added. What we want to do is we want to grab these first, it's the 7 digits. It's kind of tricky to see, and when you copy and paste it, it does the whole thing, and it actually doesn't link if you have the whole thing. So you have to part down to just the first 7 characters of that commit ID. But once you do, that is how you would reference the related commit being the first file added. Okay, and let's say, we're just not going to edit that right now because this is just an example. All right, so say that's all the changes we wanted to make to there. Now we want to push our changes. So once they've loaded, we can register it over here by reloading. Okay. So now we see we have edited first file.text is one of our newer commits. So again, it used the template, which is great. Not only that, but our links worked. So when you hover over that, you see it references that first task add data, and it references that commit of the first file was added. Not only that, but if you actually go to the related issue, this will tell you that the commit referenced this issue right here. So there are a lot of benefits to being able to link between these things. For instance, if you, again, had a bug that was introduced by a commit, and then your task assigned to you was to go fix that, then you reference the task that you were assigned that's supposed to fix the commit, fix the bug, and then you reference the commit that the bug was introduced by. So doing that just ties everything together. It really adds a great documentation aspect for developers to track changes, to minimize the number of questions and the amount of confusion that there is around some commits or changes. So overall, it's just very powerful in being able to answer questions quickly. The last part of this would be actually closing an issue. So say I have added my data, say that first file.txt took care of it. So what I'd want to do is close the issue. And again, what's nice about being able to reference commits is that you could assume from this that because I had added the commit that referenced this issue here, then that commit was the one that actually ended up closing this issue. And furthermore, if you go to your projects, that add data task that had just been closed is moved to the closed column because this is automated down here. So I hope that was a very useful demonstration of how to use GitHub for project management a little bit more. There were some things not touched in here that you can find more information about on GitHub. There are lots of other tutorials online about things. So probably did not cover everything, but hopefully I covered a lot that can be useful in managing your project with GitHub.